Hey, Alex.
Yes, sir?
Is there a right way to be broken up with?
If there is, none of the people who have dumped me recently knew about it.
Oh, I'm really sorry. And I want you to know that you are a wonderful person and you deserve to be loved and cared for in the ways that you need.
Wait a minute. It sounds like you're breaking up with me right now.
Was that it? Was that the good way of doing it?
Yeah, it was. It's great.
How did that feel?
Thanks. Good. Let's record an hour-long podcast now.
Perfect.
Like when you break up, but then you have to keep living together.
Exactly.
To make this podcast
Like a mini version of that. I think the people would love it.
This will be the last episode of Mistakes Were Made.
Welcome to Mistakes Were Made, a podcast about non-monogamy for messy people like us. I'm Sarah. I'm a queer, non-monogamous therapist, parent, and writer. And I'm so scared of breakups, I usually do it first.
Yeah. I'm her husband and co-host, Alex. I am like a serial breakup-y. I feel like I always get broken up with. And actually, Sarah, you broke up with me. I think at least once, maybe more than once.
Yeah, and it wasn't you, it was me.
Cool. 'Cause I hope it's not still you.
And I'm Jessica, resident monogamist. And Alex, I think you're the first person I ever broke up with.
God, you both broke. That's right. You broke up with me once too. I always assumed it was because Sarah made you, though. That's my narrative.
She was secretly in love with you.
There was some triangulation happening there, I think so.
Wow. Intense.
Or maybe she was secretly in love with me.
I was going to say, I was just secretly in love with both of you. So the situation
like, none
normal.
of us can be together.
No one can be happy because I am secretly in love with all of you.
Well, now that we've revealed this, I feel like the audience is going to demand that we do a whole episode about our middle school romance.
Yeah, that's that'll keep them coming back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe next episode.
Yeah. Could be. Teaser. Well, if you haven't guessed, today we are talking about breakups. And I was hoping, could I start by playing you this reel that I saw recently? There's a little section of Instagram where you can like look at things that people you are friends with or whatever have liked.
I did not know that, but okay.
Yeah. I've been looking at that recently. And this one was liked by not one, but two of my exes. So I was like...
They should make a subsection of Instagram that is actually just stuff liked by your exes.
Yeah, maybe they should allow you to block that section. But okay, here we go.
If I ever break up with you, how would you want me to do it? Is that like a bad question?
No, it's a great preparation.
I would be pretty mad
if it would come out of the blue, then I'm like, oh, we really haven't communicated, then something is like really wrong. And I hope it doesn't come to that point, right? Mm-hmm. Like communicate to me that you're unsure before you actually break up so that I can actually travel with you through your feelings. Mm-hmm. And like through your experience of losing feelings for me, let's say. Talk to me when it's starting to happen and not when it has happened. I would hope for it to not be like a heartbreak. It would be much nicer if it was like a hard fade.
I mean, of course. But I think if it's a surprise to you, then I've failed at communicating.
Yes.
And from my previous mistakes, I have learned not to fail at communicating.
Oh my God.
The visual context is also that these two people are like
beautiful,
extremely cute and
young.
beautiful, and they're like outside at a street side cafe with like blankets draped all
European.
over them.
Obviously have not been together very long because they find it whimsical and playful to talk about the possibility that they might break up.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to get your guys' reaction. My reaction, maybe because of the context, was a big, like, what the fuck?
I don't know why, but I hated that. I think the thing that I hated...
Both of your faces when it was playing.
I mean, there's just jealousy because they're young and beautiful and in Europe. But...
Nobody breaks up in Europe, right?
Yeah, why would you ever?
Not when you're that young and beautiful.
No.
But I think the thing I hated the most was when she said,
If you had to pick one.
I had to choose.
It's a hard choice.
She was like, I wouldn't want it to come out of the blue. I would like to journey with you through your experience of losing feelings for me. I would like to just state for the record, I do not want to journey through people's experiences of losing feelings for me. Please do not fucking take me on that journey.
Yeah.
Just, the second that you're losing feelings for me, I want you to identify it and then break up with me in a just like really clean, clear, brutal way. And
Just a guillotine.
just
coming
fucking
down. Guillotine you in your sleep. Yeah, I think that's what bugged me about it too, is it seemed like kind of very naive, like to just be like, yes, we'll just have a heart fade. Like, if I'm communicating well, then I'll communicate to you that I'm losing interest in you, or like, I don't care about you anymore. And like, I think
I just want to communicate with you well about how I don't care about you anymore.
Right.
That'll make it not hurt.
Yeah.
It's funny. I feel like I was like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like I thought that he was like sneak attack saying that he was about to break up with her. I was like, oh God, no.
Wow. That would be a really good Instagram reel if you were like, did that. And then we're like, because guess what? I am breaking up with you. Yeah. I was really, I don't know.
So how did it make you feel that two of your exes who you went through breakups with both liked that, and you had such the opposite reaction to it and really disliked it?
Well, I was like, what are you guys talking about? I mean, and my perception, which of course is totally self-centered and weird, was that they were like sending it to me, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense, like relative to the experience we had in our breakup, either of those breakups. So I was just like, why do these people like this thing that totally misrepresents like their method for breaking up with somebody? Yes.
Would you say that method was not a heart fate?
No.
A well-communicated
They were
heart
not
fate.
communicating their heart fate very well.
At all. Okay.
Yeah, that was my...
Well-communicated heart fade is going to be the name of my new therapeutic practice.
Yeah. Everybody loves a
At least
well-communicated.
an album. Yeah.
Well, thank you for indulging that. I needed somebody else to witness my pain in watching that.
A well-communicated heart fade. I want to fucking punch those people in the face.
Well communicated heart. It's also because like it's not cute. It's not cute.
It's not fucking cute.
What, breaking up isn't cute? Oops, sorry.
Talking about your eventual breakup like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Well,
I
and
thought
also-
I had something more
I
substance.
mean, if he's thinking about it, also, like, if he thought to make that real, he is about to break up with you.
No,
You
I
know?
disagree. I actually think in my experience as a relationship therapist, there is like part of new relationship energy or the sort of utopian feelings that you can have about relationships where they're in like first blush is that if and or when the relationship ends, it too will be remarkably good. In the way that you're experiencing this relationship as remarkably good. People are always
You,
like,
like,
do you know how many times in my office someone has said, we always said that if we got divorced or if we ended this relationship, we would stay friends. We wouldn't be cruel to each other. We would do it in a way that was respectful and kind. And guess why they're in my office?
Not doing that.
That's not what's happening.
Right.
That's, now you're making me realize that one of the people who was on one of the exes, like, I literally said to them, like, well, even if we ever break up, we'll always be friends. I would not say that we're friends now. We don't have like ill will, but we're not
Friends.
Not
We don't
friends.
talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I do think, like, I don't want to sound overly cynical, and I think I'm already positioning myself as the cynic here. But you know what? That's just an expression of my anxious attachment. We'll get into that later. But breakups fucking suck.
Yeah.
Like, it's painful. The specter
Right.
of them is painful. We're always trying to look for ways that, like, that shadow that exists in all relationships could somehow be mitigated and not be as frightening, right?
Yeah.
And that like we could keep the stakes on love being like beautiful and satisfying and fulfilling high, and we could lower the stakes on what it might feel like to lose it.
Yeah, and I think that in the early-ish phase of polyamory for us, I somehow managed to be like somewhat insulated for that. And then like, it kind of feels like it's come home to roost recently. And like, I've had a pretty hard year in a lot of ways, but part of that has been like quite a few breakups.
Well, can we stay here for a moment? Because I was going to ask you this question of like, will you kind of give us a lay of the land, the relationships, the breakups? And then I do really want to ask you about what has changed, because as your partner, I would say that your reaction to this, your experience of relationships ending, has really changed significantally.
Which one do you want first? The lay of
The lay of the land.
Not a lot of lay-in in this.
Oh.
cut that out.
Okay, that is part of what people need to know. Part of why I want you to give us a lay of the land is because you also have more relationships than I do.
Yeah,
right.
that's
So
true.
there's like a numbers game here too.
It is a function of there being a lot of relationships.
And I like how you're like leaning into this idea that you're being sort of like persecuted. But I would point out to our audience that
for listeners who can't see, I'm actually on a cross right now.
I would point out to our audience that you have a lot of relationships, and the more relationships that you have, the higher the chance that some of them will end.
I don't accept that.
Okay. All right.
No, yeah. So I had in August, I was in a very long, like a 3-year relationship that ended in August, like what felt like somewhat abruptly to me. The person was like kind of moving away, but we were sort of like working on the possibility of like how we could stay in the relationship. And they had planned to move away for a really long time too. So it was kind of like coming. And we had always kind of like thought that we would like stay in some sort of distance relationship. We had taken trips together and stuff like that. So it seemed like we could like kind of keep doing that. And then they would be back sometime. So it could like morph into a comet partnership. But then basically, I guess they decided that they didn't want to do that and that wasn't going to work for them. So I tallied that as a breakup. And that was like very difficult for me, like emotionally. I just felt like terrible. Still kind of do. No, I don't know. I'm trying to like kind of understand like why it was so hard.
Yeah.
And some of my sort of narrative about that is that it had to do with other things happening in my life and like grieving things that are happening with my parents. And, but I think it was also just like because it had been so long and kind of like sustained and it kind of felt sustainable. And then it sort of abruptly wasn't. And we hadn't been in a lot of conflict. And then we like sort of started to be in a little bit of conflict and then they just like disengaged kind of, when I would have expected that we could have weathered some more conflict and kind of like figured it out.
Yeah.
So that was one.
Yeah.
Kind of the biggest one.
Yeah.
And then in between there was somebody who I dated like pretty lightly, and so it's like kind of, you know, when you like don't really get going, I don't really count it as a breakup necessarily. This is kind of when I will actually, like I do like break things off with people. Sometimes usually in like the early stages when I'm just like, you know, I don't think this is like really a thing after like a few dates or something like that. So this was like kind of like that, but a little further along. It had been several months of like sort of sporadic dating.
Yeah, I would say it was definitely out beyond the category of having been on a few dates and not being sure if it was a thing. Because my memory of that relationship was that it was maybe you were seeing each other somewhat infrequently, depending on how you define that, but that had been going on for like 6 months or something.
It had, it was like a long duration of time, but not a lot of like time spent together. And I think in that case, the person was just sort of like not really ever really that into it, but kind of like strung it along for that long time. And then finally it was just like, I'm not really that into this. So that one was kind of like in some ways it was kind of a relief because I was kind of like doing this work to try to maintain or like make it into a relationship. And it really, you know, wasn't working very well, I don't think, for them. And then there was another one very recently in the last like month or so, which was somebody who I dated once previously, and They broke up with me once, and then we got back together. And then they broke up with me again.
Surprise.
Yeah. Who knew that was going to happen? Nobody saw that one coming.
Shocking.
Shocking. And that one has been hard. Also, I guess more because of the like circumstances of like the sort of like narrative that they had about the breakup and like my sort of like accountability for what wasn't working about it. So that's the lay of the land.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah.
That's a hard, what is that, like, not even a year. That was like
Yeah, like 8 months.
8 months.
Yeah.
That's a hard 8 months. Especially the first and the last one,
Yeah.
you know?
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it also seems worth mentioning that all of this was happening within like the year of your dad dying.
Yeah.
Somewhat suddenly as well.
Yeah.
And your mom's health rapidly declining. So
Yeah. Uh-huh.
that's
Not to paint these people as cruel, unfeeling people who would abandon somebody in their time of need, but
talk about an attachment, like, I don't know.
well, yeah, and I think that starts to speak to what you were
Universe of
saying.
just like hard attachment stuff, I think.
Like I had at least a few breakups previous to that like it's not like they didn't bother me.
Yeah.
But I think you're right in identifying that like it's been a little bit or a lot bit harder for me to like process these ones recently.
And it's, I mean, I don't want to like push this conclusion if it doesn't feel like a fit, but I also kind of wonder if some of the experiences that you've had in your family and in your life and collectively have gotten you like just more in touch with some of the feelings that you're having, you know, grief and loss and fear and anxiety that maybe you were a little less in touch with 5 years ago.
I mean,
when we
that's
started.
like an interesting question about
Just a thought.
kind of like a big question
from your
about
therapist
like
wife. Just
being,
one thought.
you know what? I preferred not being in touch with the feelings.
Yeah, give me that shit back.
What was going on? Yeah, I don't care. That's a great way to be. Yeah, I've wondered about that too. Like how much of it is being connected to the actual feelings, and how much of it is like, are the actual feelings there? I think I was feeling a lot more like confident and a lot less like vulnerable and like kind of as a result like vigilant in those previous eras before this.
In general?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I felt like I was always kind of in the position that I thought that if a relationship ended, it would be more okay because I always kind of had too much going on anyway. And I don't know if they actually like ended up feeling like that, but it certainly hasn't felt like that recently.
Yeah.
And any other questions?
Well, sorry, I was just like thinking about that characterization of your confidence. I mean, in a way, I think you and I have grown more secure in our relationship over those 5 years. I think you would probably say that you've grown more confident just like as a person, as a parent in the world. So it's kind of interesting that you would say that your arc with dating is the inverse of that.
Yeah, I think it's just like, you're right. It's not that I'm not confident, but I do think that it feels like a little bit like a pattern, that maybe that pattern is like, it can start to, you know, creep in like the self-doubt about like, is either the fundamental like kind of framework in which I'm trying to have these relationships flawed, thus leading to them like having a sort of short arc or like, you know, ending. Yeah, just like wondering about that, or wondering about like, am I a person who's like, I guess, enjoyable to be in a relationship with?
Or maybe one of the things that you're a person who's very enjoyable to be in a relationship with.
Oh, thank you.
For the record. And I know many other people also enjoy it. Many.
At least on the front end. I think that's where the confidence piece is. Like, I feel good about, you know, confident on the front end, but then it's like the sustainability part.
Yeah. Yeah. And that there's like the kind of personal side of that. And then there's the structural non-monogamy.
Right.
Like, what is possible here? You know,
Yeah, and then I sometimes project doubt onto the other people too. Like, is the problem that people always want more than I can give, and like it does. I mean, this is a hot take for this podcast about non-monogamy, but sometimes I'm just like, is non-monogamy like even a real thing that people actually can sustain, or is it always like kind of fundamentally like dissatisfying in this way for people that you know?
Right.
This is way more serious than I don't know why I naively.
Why did you think this wasn't going to be a serious
I thought it was going to be just real light and fluffy. Yeah.
How fun.
Well, and I want to like create that like sort of framework of that existential question that we can like touch back on throughout talking about breakups of, you know, what is possible in non-monogamy and how much can we like really believe that we can live it and it can work. And like how much you actually have to cultivate that faith and constantly be returning to it. Otherwise, I know for myself, I can just get in these like anxiety spirals about it actually being like impossible and not sustainable and like kind of doomed. Because that is like the narrative that you hear a lot. And you almost always have those voices in your ear. And then I feel like I run the risk of perpetuating that cycle or like creating the doom.
Yeah, right. Your doubt is the thing that causes the
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you were alluding to up top, that like you end the relationships before they can, I don't know, be ended for you or something.
And you know me, I'm like getting emotionally uncomfortable, so I'm going to intellectually this instead of talking about politics. Right?
Oh God!
And then I swear we'll get back to the fun parts of like the taxonomy of breakups. But I mean, I have been thinking a lot about how you actually have to believe that you can fucking win at a different type of world and a different type of relationship, and how hard that is, you know? And so in the political sphere, I think people on the radical left, we're always struggling with actually believing that we can win. We understand that we're in opposition to the existing system, but we have a really hard time believing that we can create alternative ones that are better and that we're actually like believe in them and are mature enough to sustain them and be responsible for them in all of their flaws. Right? Like that's the failure of the radical left that I feel most commonly, especially in this like moment of crisis. And I feel that mirrored in non-monogamy all the time. Like we know that we are in opposition to monogamy. We know that it like doesn't really work for us and that it's like this flawed system, but it's not a flawed system we have to take responsibility for, right?
Yeah.
And so like actually building polyamorous communities, relationships, or identities that then we have to be responsible for in all of their complexity, knowing that they're not going to be a utopia, right?
Yeah.
Is really hard, especially because you have these overarching systems telling you all the time, you're wrong, you're naive, you're doomed, this will fail, and you will fail alone, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you have to make up a different definition for every single part of it. For what does success look like? What does happiness look like? What does just a regular ass day look like? What does a regular ass date look like? Like you're making everything up, and we have so little modeling, like politically or in relationships, for what it can look like outside of all the systems.
And I think that's one of the things that has been very hard about the breakups that I've had is like a little bit of a loss of hope around what I thought that I could do. If you're trying to like create all those new systems, like there has to be one, like a better way for relationships to end. And I'm not necessarily saying that they don't ever end, but that they end, you know, if you were to characterize the end of a relationship in a sort of like monogamous capitalist world, it's like it ends with like extreme enmity and like a angry contested divorce and you're dead to each other, right? Like that is kind of like and
probably left like fighting over money and property for the rest of your life,
and maybe like children and your family is ruptured and all of this stuff. So like the idea that you would be trying to do something else, like in my mind, that was like you can transition a relationship or like change the level of sort of like engagement or the dynamics around it, but like still kind of stay in community. And that's what I'm always kind of like trying to do. But it's very hard.
Right.
It doesn't like, and nobody really knows how to do it.
Yeah.
So that's maybe kind of what I wanted to talk about today, is like to start thinking about that.
I also just want to put a pin in this idea that there's like a gendered element here too of the staying in community, because, you know, you have remarked that the end of my relationships have been a little bit more successful, if you want to use that word, in my ability to stay in community with people. But
Have I remarked that?
I mean,
yeah, I was going to say it's with queer people. It's with women. I have not successfully stayed in relationship with exes who are men.
Oh, yeah. All of my exes are queer women too.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is there's a dynamic between
Yes.
men and women, and especially like cis men and women that I think has to be. We don't have a lot of modeling of being in relationship with each other in any other way except for romantically.
Yeah, and there's a lot of like pre-existing wounding that is going to come into play when you come into conflict. That's going to like come up. Yeah. Anyway, so we've been talking about the why of breakups a little bit, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the how also, and just like kind of the ways that people execute a breakup, I guess. Because as I've been talking to like some of these people who are going through breakups, I've been noticing that there are some kind of like tropes, and I think maybe it's like useful to just think about like, what are those tropes? What are the ways that people like the things that people kind of like say, the narratives that they project to themselves or the person that they're breaking up with when they do, and like it may be in the long-term interest of like, how can you think about doing that better? How can one think about doing that better in a way that is perhaps like allowing you more to stay in community, or like being kind of more responsible about it.
All right.
So there's a little bit of shade in here, but so the first one is the like quiet quitting breakup, where you just kind of like slowly withdraw your interest and like your communication becomes less frequent. And I think in non-monogamous relationships, it's maybe a little easier to do this because there's less of an escalator. So there's less of like we are at this place in the relationship. Like they can be kind of, you know, I guess sort of lower level. Like non-monogamously, you can date somebody for a really long time and see them once every couple of weeks or even once a month or whatever. As opposed to like in monogamy, you probably would have moved in by then or something like that. So, so then, you know, just one party just kind of like slowing down the frequency of their communication and their sort of enthusiasm in general, and just never really saying anything until the other person who's experiencing that like finally says something about it.
My take on this as a therapist interested in attachment theory is that either these are relationships where there isn't a ton of emotional attachment, or these are relationships where both people are avoidant. I'm like, just try this shit on someone with anxious attachment. It's not going to work.
Yeah, and I don't know how I would categorize myself in that spectrum. I think I'm a little bit of both in different relationships. But yeah, it doesn't, maybe when I've experienced it, I usually like called it out at some point and was like, hey, I noticed that we don't have another date on the books. Or like, you know, that I haven't heard from you in a while. What's going on? And then even sometimes had the person be like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And then like I pushed it a little bit harder, and then they were like, yeah, okay, I'm over it.
Right. And my caveat on the attachment stuff, which we're going to talk about a lot in this episode, obviously, is that I don't actually think that people are avoidant or anxious, or, you know, I think that people can engage in those behavior patterns, in different types of relationships with different people at different times in their lives. You know, I think that it's like much more mutable. Yeah. And I don't think it's like a fixed personality, but it is fun to talk about that way. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm trying to think if I've ever done this to somebody else. There's definitely sometimes like your interest in something wanes. And if you don't feel like you're responsible to the other person, then you might just not really say. So it's funny with like relationships, just how when you're the person who is in the position of kind of reaching, or who's like, I guess, more interested in a relationship than the other person, it can feel very like intense and like, you know, kind of like dominate your feelings. And then when you're the person who's like doing the kind of like blowing off or is like less interested, it's like nothing. Like you're not thinking about it at all. Just kind of brutal.
Yeah. Power.
Power, yeah.
It's power. I always think about our friend Julia, who says it actually takes more confidence to be the person who loves more and who wants more.
Right. Yeah, because it's a more vulnerable position and you're
Right.
ceding the power.
She's always telling me that. She's like, why don't you just embrace that as power? And I'm like, working on it.
You're like, because that's not how power works. Okay, so another one, category 2 is the life pattern shift. Like something's happening that's like kind of leading to the breakup. Like somebody is moving away or they're just making some kind of change that is like, they're not dating men anymore. They're not dating women anymore. They're not dating, you know, people with primary partners anymore. There's like, you know, and sometimes that might be like directly related to their grievance and kind of the relationship that they're ending. But sometimes it might be a lot more like kind of like circumstantial. I feel like that this is the one that like feels the best to receive or is like the easiest to receive.
Agreed.
Yeah. I mean, I guess especially in polyamory or non-monogamy, I'm trying to think about, well, I don't know if I've ever been broken up with in that way. It's like thinking about it from the perspective of the person doing the breaking up feels nice because it's like totally just, it's not about
either of us.
It's not about me.
Right.
It's just like, I have to take this job in Antarctica and you don't want to move there.
There can't possibly be that many jobs in Antarctica.
Right.
That is actually the one acceptable way for people to break up with me. If you have to take a job in Antarctica.
Well, and you were talking about this in reference to also like, you know, sometimes people would be like, I'm having a child. Or, you know, I'm
my
in the middle of
fantasy,
Yeah.
That's my
tell
big
us about your fantasy.
My breakup fantasy is actually has always been, especially with men. It's always that they have a kid. And we have to break up because they have a kid.
Because they have to be up all night changing diapers.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think because of where I am in my experience of having children and the way that I relate to it, it's just like this thing where I'm like, no relationship could probably survive that. Or it's hard for me to imagine. Right? And so I wouldn't take it personally.
Right.
You know, I'm just like, oh, fuck no. Like your whole personality is going to be dismantled and rebuilt. And like, you just can't even, you know, you're going to be in a vortex for the next 3 years of your life. Right. And so this isn't my fault. This is just what has happened. Then also I'll be the last person they were with before they had a kid, so they'll always really remember me fondly. You know? I'll be like
Sarah was
romanticized
so much
forever.
fun,
Yeah.
and now
Wow,
I'm
she
just
was fucking
covered
fun.
in
And
shit.
why is life not ever that fun again? It must be because no one's as fun as Sarah. And then also I think because I tend to date men who don't have children, and there's this like eternal unknowable part of me where they like can't know this part of who I am. It's satisfying to imagine that the relationship would continue in this kind of like abstract way.
Yeah.
In that they would come to understand me, this part of me that they could never understand, even if we weren't together. And then I imagine them back remembering me really fondly again. It's like, damn, she was amazing. I can't believe she was doing this and so fucking good at sex. And I'm like, yeah, that was amazing.
That's interesting because you're making me realize that when I dated people who didn't have children, I had the same fantasy kind of. And it's like it's weird because it's not far away from the fantasy or from the like outcome where they just become monogamous. But I was sometimes kind of like, oh, they're going to meet the person who's just like the love of their life and have children with that person. And, you know, who like I always kind of felt like that'll just be OK because they need to do that. And, you know, who am I to stand in the way of their joy?
Okay, well, this is much kinder. My fantasy is more that they're forced into having the kid. It's
Got
less
it.
that they like meet someone and then they're like, Sarah, you were great, but this is the love of my life, right?
Yeah.
And it's more like shit.
Wow.
You asked.
Okay, well, let's move on. There's certainly an impulse that some people have to really like deflect all of the responsibility for a breakup onto the person that they're breaking up with. And find grievances, real or perceived, that are like, I have to break up with you because you've done XYZ thing.
It's not me, it's you.
Yeah, exactly. It's not me, it's you. And that sucks when that happens to people.
Okay, all right, time out. What's going on here?
What's this look on your face?
Yeah, so why are you trailing off?
I just feel like I had kind of had that experience, and it's like it's more nuanced. Then there's more to like get into, and there are like real grievances, but I think the sort of question of like staying in community with people through a breakup and like the hope around that. I think I had a very hard experience of somebody kind of like doing this, feeling like I had just sort of like broken their trust and like that they just didn't want to be in a relationship with me anymore because of that. And while I could see like mistakes that I had made, it also felt like the person was avoiding any accountability on their side.
It was just like things were fine, then you became a villain, and now you stayed a villain.
Yeah,
and now it's over.
And like villain is probably too strong of a word, but yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that like how extreme that transition is, that like hard turn is like very hard to process for one's self, because it's like, oh, I was like in I had the love and care of this person, and then suddenly I don't. And like, what happened and and that being, I think, if you're an emotionally mature person, like I like to fancy myself, you can hold some accountability for like, I can see why this is happening. I can see like what I've done to have caused this and mistakes that I've made, or like circumstantial kind of reasons that this is not going to work. But asking somebody to hold all of the accountability is like it's very hard.
It is. Yeah. And that's complicated because I would say I've got two perspectives here, one as your partner and one as a relationship therapist. And I would say as a relationship therapist, I mean, I think in systems, and it's very unusual, except in cases of abuse. This is not necessarily true, but in most cases, the problems that exist inside of a relationship are a result of a system that all the people involved are contributing to. Like it's a dynamic, and that dynamic requires multiple people to create it, and the dynamic is troubled, right? So there are ways that everyone is participating in that dynamic.
Yeah.
Cases of abuse are different because you're talking about like power and, systematically exerting power over somebody. And that is not like so there's nuance there. So my first instinct as a relationship therapist is like, unless we're talking about a really like abusive patterned relationship, that's just never true. It's just never true that it's all someone's fault.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I don't think that it is, but I think that it is attractive to people to end relationships that way sometimes.
But it's such an odd thing to think about yourself, right? Like if you're the person who is projecting all of the blame on someone else. So
right.
It's an odd way of
you have
conceiving
to, like,
yourself.
have a lack of kind of confidence or self-respect to be like, I got into a relationship with a person who was this terrible.
Yeah,
right?
that's the part of it that is always, and again, I guess also as a therapist to individuals, that's always something that I come back to with individuals who are kind of going through something like that, where I'm like, well, is the story here that you had terrible instincts and fell in love with a monster and didn't know, and for all this time, and then it was revealed to be the case, It's like, it's very...
Yeah, I mean, that's why it should always be a flag when you're meet somebody and they tell you a lot of stories about how they've been like victimized by other people, Right.
Yes.
Because even if that is happening and even if they're susceptible to that, like at some point they should be learning from that and not putting themselves into the same kind of situation over and over again.
And then there is this like meta piece of it too, which is you made a nod to it earlier, that men and women in particular are coming into relationships with like a lot of hurt and a lot of harm and a lot of having been abused by patriarchy, misogyny, or often in abusive relationships and dynamics previously. So I don't think, I'm maybe nuancing my take on this, that like, it's not like, oh, there's abusive relationships and then there's relationships where everybody shares the same amount of responsibility. There's also this atmospheric piece of abusive systems that these are unfolding under.
Well, and so you and I are both doing this training about transformative justice from Spring Up, which we started before all of this personal stuff happened for me, but it's applying really well. And they have a kind of like definitions for these terms that I found really helpful, that harm is like sort of the source material, something that happens where somebody is harmed by the actions of another person. Right. And hurt is that past harm being brought up again by somebody's behavior.
Oh, that is interesting.
And I find that differentiation really useful to be like, oh, I can see how I've like hurt somebody by behaving in a way that brought up this past harm. And then abuse is like kind of like further along the scale of like systematic harm that is like to continually exert power over somebody. Yes. So if you're in a relationship with somebody who has been like harmed by abusive patriarchy, or who has been like, abused in a relationship, or I guess more broadly by patriarchy, aka perhaps every single woman in this country or planet
and person, but
then it's very possible for you to hurt them through your behavior,
right? And your accountability to that is different as a result of your positionality.
And I think so in this relationship, this breakup that I was talking about, I think what I was hungry for is for the person to kind of say that, and to say, you have hurt me and that was related to this past harm. But my responsibility, their responsibility for that is just to like be like, but I was bringing that past harm to the table so I can understand how that would happen. And I don't think that you are like an abuser or even necessarily like a harmer, but well, in this context, things you did hurt me.
Right.
I know we're like getting into the kind of granular level of this, but it kind of feels important. So I don't want to skate past it. Also, I'm learning through the transformative justice training and just learning more about abolitionism and being anti-racist, that people are not abusers and harmers typically. Like there are examples of people who are just like predators and who will prey on people with less power. And maybe we can put that in a category over here, because I'm sure there's like some nuance there to explore as well.
Probably also products of the systems.
Probably also products of the systems, probably also more inclined to be called that based on, their identities. And most people, everyone has harmed people and everyone has hurt people. And I think like calling someone a harmer or an abuser or, is not really that helpful, because all of us could plot there somehow. But that doesn't mean that accountability is all the same. But I just like wanted to get in there and like make that distinction.
And the only way that cycle of abuse is not broken by shunning people who are identified as harmers or abusers, because then they'll just go do it somewhere else. Right. It's like, that's kind of what we're talking about, I think, is like staying in community with people kind of regardless of where they land on that spectrum, and not just being like, this, you know, this person has like done something that is irreconcilable, and so they're like kind of like relegated to unhuman status or something like that, right?
But you can just see how much nuance there is, and if we're like kind of pulling back out of this and bringing in breakups again, you can see that there's just all this nuance. People are allowed to have boundaries. People are allowed to end relationships. People, you know, are allowed to decide not to be in relationship with someone. People get to define for themselves whether they were harmed or hurt, right?
Yeah.
So it's all like, there's a lot to hold at once.
Yeah.
As we try and like move through this type of breakup, like who's getting blamed, what does blame mean, who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, is there one, is that helpful, when do we need that language, when don't we, do we ever need it?
And I think that when you have that kind of narrative, it requires the other person to treat you as the bad guy too, right? Like, you know, in this situation, it's very hard for me to like maintain compassion for the person who is like kind of like putting all the responsibility on me for our relationship ending. Like, it's very difficult to receive that and be like, you know, I still care about and trust this person, you know?
Right.
It's very rupturous. I mean,
and then it puts you in a place where you're in this place of, rupture, and you know, it's hard to like be in community together and stuff.
Yeah, it is. And some of this, like to our point, maybe there are ways to mitigate this type of breakup. Maybe it's also an inevitable type of breakup in a world where there is so much harm and so much hurt that people are bringing into relationships that exist inside the systems that we're all a part of. And given our lack of practice and accountability, you know, all the way around, we are not raised in a culture that teaches us how to be accountable. And teaches us how to like stay through conflict, and certainly to stay through shame and dismantle that. So I just want to like, this one is actually very political, I think. And so I wanted to just like make it be big.
Yeah. And if the pattern is that people who accept blame are shunned, then it makes it really hard to accept blame too.
Right.
And maybe there's a better world where those people are still cared for, and then that makes it easier for somebody to be like, yes, I've done something that harmed you.
Or hurt you. Or even that we're not going to stay in relationship, but this doesn't have to be like an indictment of my ability to be in community. Yeah, and then there's the entire like question of repair around that, which is a bigger piece, and we haven't gotten to that unit in our transformative justice. So we'll come back to that.
TBD.
We're only 2 units in, so we've exhausted our knowledge on this. Moving on to the next bullet.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I do want to say that like this like scales, I think in the situation that I'm talking about, it's like not at quite the kind of extreme scale that it could be around like abuse and stuff like that, but it is still has echoes of some of these questions, challenges. And like maybe on the flip side of that, there's another one that I sort of experienced was like this, like a sort of minimizing breakup that's like, maybe it's kind of related to the like quiet quitting one, but just sort of being like, well, this has to end, but it's okay. It never really mattered anyway, which I think is a bit of a like a probably a polytrope.
Yes,
like,
yes.
You know, we're not building our entire lives together, so when relationships end, it's NBD.
And this goes back to what I was saying about people, this escape hatch in poly, which is always like, hey, we don't actually think this is real, right? Like, if things get weird or we get spooked or something happens, we all know that these are fake relationships.
Psych.
Right. Yeah.
Ow. That one, I don't like that one. I don't like that one.
Yeah, it is rough. I think it's like, I can see how it's tempting.
Yeah.
And it's kind of tempting on either side of it to be like, yeah, that's true. Didn't really matter. So.
I mean, I feel like one of the 3 recent breakups that you described, you kind of described this way.
Right. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So was it really not a big deal?
Yeah, it wasn't a big but it's like for scale, one of them was like 3 years long and one of them was, 6 months long. And one of them, the cumulative like amount of time that we like spent together and the intensity of the relationship was much higher.
Right.
But also,
so there's two different kinds of it not having been a big deal. One, like it actually not having been a big deal because he only went on 6 dates or whatever. And the other one being like, this is not real because it's poly. And so we're sort of like
or I guess like
invisibilizing it.
The subtext of the breakup that I went through that kind of had some of these echoes was that I wasn't bringing enough to it. So it wasn't a big deal because like that's how I was framing it. So I shouldn't be upset when it ended. Because, that was the
because you didn't care enough.
I was
in the
bringing
first
an
place.
NBD energy the whole time.
okay, so it's a game of chicken. Who cares less?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Sounds fun. I mean, what I would say, this is me, and so it's not universally true at all, but all of my relationships have actually mattered. You know, I mean, I still think about relationships that lasted 6 months, 8 months, that were 5 or 6 dates. Like, they all fucking mattered to me. Being intimate with people that way, and the way you get to know people, especially like when you're physically intimate with each other, to me, it just, I mean, I know other people are different, but to me, it all kind of matters.
Yeah, I
think
agree.
about every single one of those people
and
in some way, shape, or form.
Like quote unquote sort of like romantic relationship, the way that you treat it, the way that most people treat them differently is like, it is like a very powerful like level of investment and care. Right. And so like, if I like hung out with somebody a few times as friends or like even like a bunch of times and then we kind of like fell out of touch, it is just going to feel different than when like, you were sort of like sharing vulnerability and intimacy with people, physical or not. And we're like, what makes it that kind of relationship is like that you care about the person a lot and you're like saying, I'm going to like care for you and you're going to care for me. So taking that element away is like always going to be a big deal.
And I think it's just wild. And if I may reflect on one of the breakups that you went through, the longer one, where there was like a possible de-escalation and then a kind of abrupt ending that came with a little bit of the it never really mattered that much messaging, that fucked me up. I took that personally.
Right.
Because to me, years of being in someone's house, knowing their community, knowing their body, knowing their lives, traveling with them through time, traveling with them to actual places, taking them to the fucking doctor. I'm just like, if this shit doesn't matter, then you actually don't think anything except monogamy matters.
Right.
And I think like there's a way that people will have like, it's that escape hatch.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And as the meta, you're invested in it too.
Yeah, that sucked.
Yeah. Okay, one more, and then we can take a break or just.
This was the fun section.
Yeah, this was the fun section. So a friend told us recently about the experience they had of like being in a relationship with somebody, kind of briefly, and then them it being revealed that the person was not being honest with their other partner about the relationship. But then the way that they described like the breakup, this was the person who had been kind of lying to them, breaking up with them, and they were just kind of like, I'm just a total piece of shit and I've been doing all of these horrible things to you.
Yes,
and
the
it
total
almost
piece of shit
felt
breakup.
like they were like they were giving more information than they even needed to, that was kind of more hurtful to the person who, was, I guess, being broke up with ostensibly. And it was like, who is this for? And then it kind of like a penny drop for me that like, oh, that's like for the other partner.
Right.
It's like a triangulation breakup where they're like, I want to stay in the relationship with this person over here. So I'm going to tell, the third party everything that I have to, that's like almost in service to the person that I want to stay with.
Yeah. There is a I'm a piece of shit breakup. The I'm a piece of shit breakup is a category of breakup of its own. And I also like see this in my practice a lot. There's someone who comes in and they're, instead of being blamed entirely by the other person, they're entirely blaming themselves.
Right.
They're just like, I am a total piece of shit. you don't deserve me. I'm so sorry. Everything you say is right. I am totally wrong. I am disgusting. I'm horrible. Like all of that.
Which is, sounds like our 9-year-old.
It's not the most mature. It's not the most mature.
And totally just like not, even though it sounds like it is, but it's like not taking any responsibility.
Yeah.
Whatsoever.
By taking all the responsibility, you're not taking any responsibility.
You're not actually engaging with anything.
Because it's almost like, I don't care what you think about me.
And I don't care enough about this dynamic to stand up for anything.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just like not going to risk any kind of conflict with you. I'm not going to risk like any sharing my narrative with you.
Yeah. And so I guess, in some ways saying, I've realized that you're a horrible person is about the same as saying, I've realized I'm a horrible person.
And like, but I'm not going to bother to deal with any of this. It feels very adolescent. This was like high school and early 20s breakups were all of this ilk.
Right.
It's childish.
Yeah.
I mean, you could still just like move to Europe and
I hear
20s.
There's some jobs in Antarctica.
That's much better. Okay, so that's the taxonomy of ways that people break up with people.
Every single time
We've
from
got
breakup. Covered.
We covered them all. And you're saying, the conclusion is just move to Antarctica every time.
Yeah, it's the perfect solution.
Fake your own death. It's the perfect spring.
I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because I was like, what is my breakup pattern with people? And maybe, I know we're running out of time, but I might add one, which is probably some version of, you're going to ultimately figure out that you don't want to be with me, so I'm going to save you the trouble. Which is closely related to my deepest fear about polyamory, which is that I will be too complicated of a partner to actually have it over a long period of time, given that it's inevitable that you will figure that out or find someone who's less complicated or more lovable. Some combination of less complicated, more lovable, less children, probably younger. Why don't we just like, we've had fun up to this point. Let's spare ourselves that inevitability and end it. And this is my response to increasing attachment with people. So this is like a way that I'm charming.
That's what I was going to ask is like, where do you think that comes from? Or like, when does it come up in a relationship?
I think it comes up for me in a relationship the first time I'm actually like faced with like the hard material of the relationship or increasing attachment or conflict, you know? And then I'm just like, oh, here it is. Here's all that material. Like all those big fears that I have alongside caring about somebody more. And then some conflict comes up and I'm like, let's just break up.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you want to talk about this now, but it seems like recently you've had the experience of like coming up to this point in a relationship and then like deciding to do something different.
Yeah, I have had that experience. And I do want to talk about it, but I have to pee.
Sure you do.
You just hear the window opening in the bathroom.
She's out of here. Okay, I have to leave you guys.
You're abandoning
on your
us.
own. Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
breaking up
do?
with this episode.
I mean, it's not you. It's me.
Your life circumstances are changing.
I do actually have to go. I mean, it's not Antarctica, but I have to go to Redmond to record
yeah, might
another
as well.
podcast. So, I mean,
Oh, you're
you guys
leaving
can
us
come
for
with-
another podcast.
Wow.
Wow.
Now the truth comes
We didn't
out.
even get to that bullet point of types of breakups.
And this podcast is about monogamy.
Oh, God.
No, it's not. It does pay though, right?
It does pay. It pays a lot better than you guys.
You heard it.
Actually, it does. I mean, money, whatever. I guess we need it, but I would rather be here.
Okay.
But I'm a piece of
That's
shit.
what they
who
always
has to
say.
I was
go.
going to say, I fucking hear that a lot.
All right, get out of here. Prepare
Okay.
for.
I'm blocking your text. I'm blocking your number.
Don't block my number. No, we can be together again. Okay.
Bye, Jess.
Okay, we're back from the break. Jessica's gone, and Sarah is going to be
The vulnerable one.
The vulnerable one. I've always thought you were vulnerable.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you're trying to do something different than just bailing when things get a little bit hard or you come into conflict because it feels inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I am. I definitely have said on this podcast before. And so I knew in some way that I didn't tend to get past a certain marker in relationships. You know, it was like there was this kind of running joke that somewhere around the 8 or 9 month mark, something would happen and the relationships would end. And kind of to your point about how in the beginning of polyamory, everything can feel sort of new and circumstantial and you don't really see your own patterns emerge. But by the time you're in your 5th year and you're like, I've had one relationship that has gotten past the 8 month mark in 5 years. It might be me. And even when you can see those things about yourself, you like enact the pattern again. And so with the partner I've been dating for now, it's been like 10 or 11 months. I know, right? But around 8 months, we started like having conflict, a lot of these insecurities that were coming up. You know, I have, again, with these patterns of dating men who are not like in a domestic partnership with someone, don't have kids, and are about 5 years younger than me. And it's just like, I have so much insecurity about that. And yet I find myself in those relationships, not a lot, but it's like the most common profile probably.
We'll talk about that in another episode.
What's that?
We'll talk about that pattern on another episode.
Okay. All right. You know, but I think one of my biggest fears is always that I'm just kind of a stopgap in between actual real relationships. And like, I'm sort of a fun novelty.
I think of you that way.
I mean, I am a fun novelty.
Now that Jessica's gone, we're just blatantly flirting.
Are you playing footsie?
Yeah. You want to take this podcast recording into the bedroom? Might
You
be
know
more
what? That
comfortable.
is also probably one of the reasons why our listeners keep coming back, is the promise that one day we might. Maybe next episode.
What would that sound like? Anyway, sorry, go on. We're going to cut that part out.
Okay. Right. So that I'm a fun novelty. Essentially, like, I tend to get in relationships with these guys after they've gotten out of a big one. And I just figure that they are in them with me because I am not actually a person that they can get into a real relationship with. Because circumstantially, I'm like, I'm not. Right?
Right. Yeah.
Not in the way that like would matter to them, or that like matters with the big M. And that's fine in my mind for the first 8 months.
Right.
You know, I'm like, this is fun. This is just like, we met each other at a good moment. We're having a good time. And then, you know, catch feelings, or things get complicated, or there's some kind of conflict. And at least for me, there's just this moment where it's like, this is when you get out, right? You either wait around for that inevitability that I've described, or you get out. And so that's what I definitely tried to do.
But usually you find there's some sort of inciting reason
Yeah,
for
I'm super good at that.
getting out. Yeah. And then it's interesting. I'm sure like on the receiving end, the people who you're breaking up with are like confused by that.
Yeah.
Do they argue with you?
Well, let me think about it. I think that this experience broke with type for me, because in my last like four bigger breakups since we started, there was circumstance. One person moved. One person got into a relationship. I mean, that thing did happen, essentially, where they got into a relationship that was a more primary partnership, and it was hard to make room for our relationship. So I did have like that fear kind of proven in a way.
Right. Although I think you both had the narrative coming out of that relationship that the other person was the one who
broke it
ended
off.
the relationship.
Yes, that's true. And then the other relationships I've had, I think like we didn't even really get to that big of an emotional point. But even in like one I had like last year with someone that was more in that category of, we saw each other like twice a month for, 6 or 7 months or something like that. That one, there was like the beginning of a conflict around like, they ended up dating someone that I was in a professional community with, and it was like got a little bit messy. And then I was just like, well, this is probably where this relationship ends anyway. So we'll just kind of use this as...
That's what you were saying to yourself.
Yeah, that we'll just use this as our out, sort of.
Yeah.
So in this case, yeah, go ahead. You should ask me questions. Yeah.
Well, just to comment on those last ones, I'm trying to think about like how which sort of trope that we were talking about they fit into. And it kind of seems like they're sometimes kind of minimizing.
Yes, definitely.
Where you're just minimizing the relationship.
Yeah. Maybe a life pattern and shift, minimizing and triangulation a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me how are you going to do it differently this time?
Yeah. Okay. So.
Or why? Or where? Or when?
The husband wants to know.
Or whether.
Well, I think to the credit of my partner, who is a system, also not perfect. It wasn't like the challenges in our relationship were completely ginned up by me. There are challenges, like really different life phases, kind of like different lifestyle and need stuff that are just hard to navigate, right? And all of that like easily pointed to this is not going to work. And so I'll just build up my little argument around those things. I will present it. And honestly, I think I kind of thought he would go for it.
Yeah.
I was like, this has worked other times. Right. And, it's like my sort of testing where I'm like, this doesn't really matter, right? This doesn't really matter. But he didn't go for it. I would say in the beginning, he was just like, what the absolute fuck are you doing? I'm so mad at you. And then I kind of used that. I was like, see, I was like, no.
Right.
Tolerance for conflict. Also, another reason why we can't be together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and he was not perfect in the way that he responded to any of that. No.
It's interesting because like we were talking about this stuff as it was happening, and I was convinced by all of the things you were saying.
The problems are actually fucking real. Yeah. I'm not like making them up. The problems are real. It's about whether or not you want to stay in relationship with someone who has problems or in a relationship that has problems.
Yes.
And everybody has fucking problems and every relationship has problems. Yeah. And I don't actually believe that people want to stay in a relationship with me, the problems that I bring to it. And so I was like kind of testing that in my own way.
Dude, me neither. I also don't believe that.
I really don't believe it.
And it's like I want to believe that I want to stay in relationship with other people who have problems. And I'm like really kind of trying to lean into that all the time. But I'm not necessarily sort of vulnerable enough to do the same thing myself and be like, here are my problems and you're going to accept it. And I think when somebody breaks up with you, it's easy to be like, have that reinforced. Yeah. That like, oh, it's because of these things that are kind of wrong with me.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense that they went out. But I guess maybe ironically, being vulnerable in that way is possibly the thing that is gonna, and now I'm totally talking about myself here, but maybe the reason a lot of these relationships have ended for me, like that the actual core reason for the other person is that I'm not being vulnerable enough. Not to make it all about me, which is what I just did.
That's okay. Yeah. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Is how at bottom, all of these breakups are about the same thing, which is everybody's like, I'm too much, I'm not enough. I want to protect myself from that being pointed out to me or from having to like face that.
Okay. So I wanted to bring in something else that I think maybe is, or get your reaction to something else that is maybe like sort of counter evidence to that. Because after I thought through all these like different kind of types of breakups and had a very like sort of self-centered, like here's been my experience of like hurt around being broken up with in these different ways. And here's like my grievances with the ways that people did it. I talked to somebody else who I'm dating. Believe it or not, I am still dating somebody in spite of all of these breakups. And they were and I asked them to just like describe their experience of breaking up with somebody. And they like told me this story about how they had been dating somebody and they had a lot of experiences, like smaller incidents with that person that kind of like led to an erosion of trust. And a waning of their enthusiasm about the relationship. And none of those things sort of taken individually were like necessarily like deal breakers or like really overt harm, but they were just like, I realized I wasn't excited to be doing it anymore. And so I wanted to end the relationship. And I guess that was just eye-opening for me to be like, oh, that's like, the flip side experience is like, kind of regardless of what you say, like which of those narratives you present, like that is a valid thing to be happening.
Oh yeah,
leading
to
up
just
to a
not want to
breakup.
be in a relationship anymore.
You just don't want to be
Yes,
in the relationship
yes,
anymore.
absolutely.
And you could sort of point to
Yes.
like, here's the thing that you did or the things that you did that make me feel this way. But it's almost like out of your control.
Yeah, right. And relationships end for valid reasons, for good reasons. It's not bad for a relationship to end in and of itself.
Yeah.
They all will somehow.
Right.
So, we don't have to like pathologize a breakup and assume that everybody is breaking up or getting broken up with because there's something bad or wrong happening.
Yeah.
I think that's why you keep trying to pull us back to the how. Like, how do we do it? And understanding the why is important too. But it's not like we're trying to eradicate the breakup.
No, it's like we're trying to do it better somehow.
Yeah. And
But is that possible?
And things happen between people that they don't come back from, you know? And it's okay. That's still like learning. And the relationship is still like important when that's the case.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to do something different, to your point. I'm trying to like stay. I'm trying to stay in a relationship through, identifying like some of that material that's hard for me, or that's like hard between us. And not treating these relationships like they don't really count, or not like always having a little trapdoor to jump through when my own insecurities get too loud. Because I really do want to know how to do that. And because it really matters to me.
Yeah. Well, and that takes a high level of sort of self-awareness to like recognize the pattern that you have and then be like, I'm going to try and break that pattern rather than kind of deflecting it to, I feel this aversion because of something that the other person has done.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know when it's one or when it's the other?
Like have discernment around that?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think in the specific case of this partner, a big part of it was how we moved through that conflict.
Yeah.
And the beginning, when he was so mad at me and was just kind of like yelling at me and demanding things, I was like, okay, I may have been right. This doesn't really seem like a relationship that's going to last or should.
Yeah.
And then like when we sort of moved through some of that and we're communicating a little bit better and like pulling things out of the material and being like, look, this is the stuff that exists between us. We aren't going to be able to like change it, but we can talk about it, and we can like sort of be accountable to it and see it as part of the material of our relationship. That made me feel like, well, this is maybe a partner I could do that with, where I could try and like move through hard things with him. And he wants to with me.
And it also sounded like you sort of got to the point where you were like, you recognize like, this is just going to happen over and over again in every relationship kind of at this point. So I need to like do the work, even though it's hard to like break that pattern. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes. And I'm just like, I need to grow the fuck up a little bit and actually believe that polyamory can like work. And it like gets back to that earlier point in the episode where I think, I can always like have my like feet in the pool enough that I'm like playing with everybody, but I'm not actually like immersed. I'm not really like risking as much. And I just like really saw that about myself. And I think like it matters in the context of this specific relationship to me. It matters also in like the way I think about myself and polyamory, but it also just like matters in trying to make a life that is thoughtful and, designed for the people in it.
Yeah. And I think that
some real
kind of
risks with that,
gets into that question of like, what is the point of trying to like break up better?
Right.
If you're not going to stay in like, some sort of intense, rewarding relationship with the person that's maybe the reason that you started it, like, why not just, take these easy outs, easy emotional outs? And I guess the reason is kind of bigger than the relationship itself.
Yeah. And it's like, what do you believe about relationships? That they're only good when they're fun? That you're looking for the one where nothing that like pushes on the tenderest parts of you ever emerges? Like, why are you having them? What is the point?
Yeah. Well, and I think there's the sort of like disposable culture that, tells you that it should always be easy. And even when you talk about things that are hard, like the clip we were playing at the beginning, like even the hard part's going to be like beautiful and cute and easy. Right. But it's not.
It's not. And like, this partner and I were talking about like, why are we in relationships? Why are people in relationships? And we talk about this on the show all the time. It's like to learn, it's to grow, it's to like change. I also think that it's to heal. And I don't think that you heal through hiding the hardest parts of yourself from the people who love you and you love.
That'll never work.
Right.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yay.
Just light, springy, sexy material.
Hell yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, Sarah, for talking about this with me. And thank you, everybody, for listening to me complain about my breakups. And we'll be back in a couple weeks with another episode of Mistakes Were Made. If you liked this podcast, then please tell your friends and check us out on your podcast platform of choice, and hit the subscribe button so we get more followers and more juice or whatever. And then eventually we all become millionaires, right?
That's right. That's the long game. Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.
It was good to be back talking with you.
Yeah.
I love you.
I love you too.
Bye.